I closed my bank accounts 3 days before my daughter-in-law's birthday, the same day my son promised her a $90,000 luxury SUV he could never afford. By nightfall, his marriage was cracking. Strangers were watching his humiliation unfold online, and I was left holding the truth every parent fears. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting everything fall apart. What followed shattered illusions, exposed painful truths, and forced both of us to confront the cost of living for appearances instead of reality. I never imagined protecting my future would cost my son his. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. Morning arrives gently in Scottsdale. The sun slides over the pale stucco walls and gravel yards, lighting the tops of palm trees before it reaches the ground. By 7, the desert air still holds a trace of coolness, and the sidewalks are already dotted with retirees walking small dogs or carrying pickleball paddles. It is a quiet rhythm, predictable and unhurried, the kind of rhythm I spent most of my life working toward. My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 71 years old, and I have been a widow for 12 years. My husband, Robert, served as a firefighter for the city of Phoenix for nearly 3 decades. He believed in showing up, in doing hard things without complaint, and in coming home with his integrity intact. When cancer took him, it did so quickly and without mercy. But even in those final weeks, he worried more about me and our son than about himself. I spent 34 years working as a nurse, most of them on overnight rotations in a medical surgical unit where time moved in alarms and fluorescent light instead of sunrise and sunset. After Robert died, those shifts became our lifeline. I raised our only child, Daniel, on overtime hours, hospital cafeteria dinners, and a stubborn refusal to let grief dismantle our home. I did not buy luxuries. I bought school shoes, science fair supplies, and the quiet reassurance that stability still existed. Daniel grew into a kind boy who hated disappointing anyone. He played baseball one season, trumpet the next, never excelling at either, but trying with a seriousness that made me proud. I believed I taught him the value of money, of effort, and of living within one's means. At the time, I thought those lessons had taken root. Retirement, when it finally arrived, felt less like an ending and more like a soft exhale. I sold the larger house and moved into an active senior community on the north side of Scottsdale. My days found an easy structure: pickleball in the mornings, volunteering at the public library twice a week, grocery trips on Tuesdays, and quiet evenings with tea and paperbacks. After decades of alarms and emergencies, peace felt almost luxurious. Daniel is 45 now and works as a sales manager for a real estate firm. He is personable, persuasive, and good with people in a way that makes strangers trust him within minutes. 6 years ago, he married Vanessa. She is 38 and runs a lifestyle brand online built around elegant simplicity and aspirational living. Her photographs are soft and sunlit, her captions full of gratitude and intention. In the beginning, she embraced me warmly. She called me Mom M, hugged me as if we had known each other for years, and posted birthday tributes praising my strength. I remember thinking my son had chosen well. Their wedding took place at a vineyard in Napa Valley, all white linens and golden hills stretching behind the ceremony chairs. I felt both proud and faintly out of place, as if I were visiting someone else's life. Still, Daniel looked happy, and that was enough. After they married, something subtle shifted. Visits felt curated. Moments paused for photographs before they were lived. Daniel began speaking more about image and presentation. I told myself it was simply how younger couples live now. I believed my hardest years were behind me. I believed my son was building a life stronger than the one I had managed to give him. And in that belief, I rested, unaware that peace can sometimes exist only in the space before truth arrives. If you're still watching, and this beginning feels familiar in a quiet, unsettling way, comment one below so I know you're here with me. What started as a peaceful retirement may not be as secure as it seems, and what I discovered next changed everything. Life in Scottsdale continued in its gentle, sunlit rhythm. But sometime late that summer, small interruptions began to slip into the quiet. They did not arrive all at once. They came the way desert wind arrives before a storm. Almost unnoticed at first, then impossible to ignore. Daniel's first call came after one of the sudden monsoon storms that sweep through Arizona and vanish as quickly as they appear. He explained that high winds had torn loose several sections of roofing tile. Insurance would cover most of it, he said, but the deductible was higher than they expected. He sounded embarrassed, as though asking the question cost him something. I transferred the money that afternoon. Helping felt natural, almost automatic. When your child is in need, you do not consult a ledger. A few weeks later, he called again. Their golden retriever had swallowed something it should not have, and the emergency veterinary visit was expensive. He assured me the dog would recover, but the bill had arrived at the worst possible time. I told him not to worry. I sent the money before he finished thanking me. The third request came that autumn, an unexpected property tax adjustment. His voice carried a strain I did not remember hearing when he was younger. He apologized more than once, promising this would be the last time. I believed him. I told myself that young families face pressures my generation never imagined. Fluctuating housing markets, rising taxes, the invisible competition of modern life. When I raised Daniel, survival meant paying the mortgage and keeping the lights on. Now, success seemed measured by subtler and more expensive standards. If easing his burden made his life steadier, then helping was simply an extension of love. When I visited their home, I began noticing changes that were small enough to dismiss but frequent enough to register. A new outdoor seating set replaced the perfectly good one I remembered from spring. Designer light fixtures hung where ordinary glass domes once had been. The wine Daniel poured at dinner was French and priced well beyond anything I would have purchased for myself. I asked no questions. I did not want to sound critical, nor did I want to be the kind of mother who keeps score. One Sunday evening, they invited me for dinner. The dining room glowed with warm lighting, and Vanessa moved gracefully between the kitchen and table, her phone resting face up beside the serving dishes. Conversation drifted easily until she began describing a friend who had just purchased a vacation home near Lake Tahoe. She spoke about lake views, clean air, and the restorative power of stepping away from the city. Then she added that environment shaped well-being and long-term brand value. The phrase sounded rehearsed, as though it had lived on her tongue for some time. Daniel did not say anything, but he glanced at me across the table. The look lasted only a second, yet it stirred a memory of him at 8 years old, standing silently in a toy aisle, hoping without asking. Vanessa continued, explaining how visual surroundings influence their partnerships and opportunities. She spoke in the language of aesthetics and elevation, as if a home were not merely shelter, but an identity. I smiled and nodded, though something inside me tightened. Driving home that night, the desert sky stretched wide and starless above the highway. I told myself I was imagining things, that success simply looked different now than it once had. Still, a faint uneasiness followed me into my quiet living room, settling in like dust I could not see but somehow felt. Over the next weeks, I noticed packages stacked near their front door and conversations that circled back to upgrades and impressions. I reassured myself that I was overthinking, that concern was a habit left over from harder years. Yet, uneasiness has a way of arriving long before the truth that explains it. If you can sense the tension building beneath the surface, comment 2 below to let me know you're still with me. The small requests I brushed aside were only the beginning, and the next discovery forced me to question everything I trusted. Chapter 3: The Statement That Changed Everything. The morning the statement arrived began like any other. Sunlight slid across my kitchen counter, warming the pale stone surface where I set my tea each day. I carried the mail inside, sorting envelopes into neat piles at the small table near the window. Bills, a catalog I did not remember requesting, a flyer from the community center. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent. I opened the credit card statement last, more out of habit than concern. Most months it held predictable charges: groceries, gas, the occasional dinner with friends, and small purchases Daniel made when he used the card for emergencies. I unfolded the paper and glanced at the total. Then I looked again. $18,400. For a moment, I did not breathe. The number seemed to sit on the page with a weight that pressed against my chest. I traced the digits with my eyes, certain I had misread them. The amount did not change. I turned to the itemized list: a custom furniture retailer I had never visited, a premium audio installation service, a luxury fashion boutique in Scottsdale Quarter, an interior design consultation fee, line after line, each one precise and undeniable. None of them belonged to me. 2 years earlier, I had added Daniel as an authorized user when he changed jobs and his credit temporarily suffered. He insisted it was only for emergencies. I agreed without hesitation. Until now, his charges had been modest and appropriate: gasoline, groceries, the occasional hardware store purchase. He had never given me reason to question him. I sat at the table for a long time, the paper resting in my hands. My first feeling was not anger. It was confusion, a quiet disbelief that left me searching for explanations. Perhaps these were business expenses connected to real estate staging. Perhaps he intended to reimburse me immediately. Perhaps there was a detail I did not yet understand. I dialed his number before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted, as if moving through a busy room. I could hear faint voices behind him, the murmur of activity. When I mentioned the statement, he hesitated only briefly before explaining that they had upgraded their living space to support Vanessa's brand partnerships and content production. He spoke with confidence, describing it as an investment that would generate future income. He said a sponsorship agreement was pending and promised to repay the full amount soon. His tone was reassuring, almost casual, as though the sum were temporary and easily resolved. I told him I understood. I said we would sort it out. After we hung up, I remained at the table, staring at the sunlight inching across the floor. I wanted to believe him. Trust had always come easily between us, built over decades of shared struggle and quiet perseverance. Yet somewhere beneath that trust, something had shifted, too subtle to name and too heavy to ignore. I heard Robert's voice in my memory, steady and practical. Trust, but pay attention. Weeks passed. No payment arrived. The balance remained, and interest began to gather quietly, like dust settling in corners you do not often inspect. I considered calling again, but each day I postponed the conversation, telling myself he was waiting on paperwork, that business moved slowly, that patience was a form of support. Still, when the next statement arrived, I felt a tightness in my chest before opening it. Nothing had been openly broken. No harsh words had been spoken. Yet something fundamental, something rooted in trust and responsibility, no longer felt secure. And once that certainty shifts, it never settles back quite the same way. If that moment made your stomach drop the way it did mine, comment 3 below so I know you're still watching. What I found on that statement was shocking, but the request that followed was even harder to face. In the weeks after the statement arrived, I found myself watching more than speaking. Nothing had been resolved, yet life continued in its outward normalcy. Daniel did not mention repayment again, and I did not press him. Instead, I paid closer attention, as though clarity might emerge from the details I had once ignored. When I visited their house one afternoon, sunlight poured through the wide windows and struck surfaces that seemed arranged rather than lived with. Decorative objects sat in careful symmetry on the coffee table. A woven throw lay folded across the back of the sofa without a wrinkle. Near the far wall, a tall ring light stood beside a tripod, its cord coiled neatly against the baseboard. Vanessa greeted me warmly and moved through the house with practiced ease, pausing occasionally to adjust a vase or smooth a cushion. She spoke about filming schedules and upcoming collaborations, explaining that consistent visual presentation helped maintain audience engagement. Her language carried a professional fluency, as if each sentence had been tested for clarity and appeal. While she talked, I noticed several unopened boxes stacked discreetly near the hallway entrance. The labels bore the names of boutique retailers I recognized from the credit card statement. I did not ask about them. Later that afternoon, as I prepared to leave, Vanessa mentioned she had to return a vehicle before the rental period ended. The comment passed quickly, yet it lingered in my thoughts. That evening, I saw a photograph she posted online. She stood beside a glossy white sport utility vehicle, sunlight reflecting off the polished surface. The caption celebrated gratitude and new beginnings. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was the same rental company decal I had noticed earlier. The realization did not feel like deception so much as performance. As autumn approached, Vanessa began speaking about her 40th birthday. She described it as the beginning of a new chapter, a time for reinvention and elevated goals. Milestones, she said, deserve to be marked with intention. Daniel listened with an attentive expression that I recognized from his childhood, the look he wore when trying to anticipate what would make someone proud of him. That night, my phone rang after 10. Daniel rarely called that late. His voice was careful, almost rehearsed. He explained he wanted to do something meaningful for Vanessa's birthday, something that reflected her work and the image she had built. Then he asked if I could help with a down payment, $35,000, for a Lexus sport utility vehicle. I sat at the edge of my bed, the lamplight pooling softly on the quilt, and reminded him of the unpaid credit card balance. He assured me the money would be coming soon, that new contracts were pending, and the vehicle would strengthen Vanessa's brand visibility. He paused before adding that Vanessa was accustomed to a certain standard of living and that failing to meet it might reflect poorly on him, especially with her family. His words carried an exhaustion deeper than financial strain. He spoke as though success were measured not in stability, but in appearances. After we ended the call, I lay awake in the darkness, replaying his voice in my mind. I thought about the boy who once saved allowance money in a jar labeled college, and the man who now equated providing luxury with preserving love. Somewhere along the way, approval had become currency. I stared at the ceiling until the first gray hint of morning crept through the curtains. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that helping might no longer be helping at all. A boundary I had never imagined drawing hovered just ahead, faint but unmistakable, like a line in the desert sand waiting for the wind to decide its shape. If you're starting to see how pressure and appearances can reshape a life, comment 4 below to stay with me. That late-night phone call left me staring into the dark, knowing a line was coming that I could no longer avoid crossing. I slept very little that night. Each time I drifted toward rest, my mind returned to the same question. At what point does helping become harm? By the time the first pale light slipped through the curtains, I had stopped pretending sleep would come. I rose, made tea, and stood at the kitchen window watching the desert morning unfold in soft shades of gold and gray. The neighborhood was quiet. A man across the street watered his succulents with slow precision. A pair of quail darted along the curb, their small bodies purposeful and alert. Nothing in the world outside suggested that anything had changed. Yet inside me, something had settled into place with unmistakable clarity. For years, I had helped Daniel through difficulties that felt temporary and necessary. After Robert died, survival required flexibility and sacrifice, and I believed offering support was part of being a mother. But somewhere along the way, emergency assistance had blurred into lifestyle maintenance. The distinction mattered, and I could no longer pretend it did not. I gathered my financial folders from the desk drawer and spread them across the table. Account summaries, statements, passwords written carefully in a small notebook Robert once kept. I reviewed balances and access permissions, noting which accounts included Daniel's authorization. My hands did not tremble. If anything, my movements felt steadier than they had in weeks. By 9:30, I was driving toward the bank. The sky had turned a clear, unwavering blue, and traffic moved in patient lines along Scottsdale Road. Inside the branch, the air was cool and faintly scented with the carpet cleaner and paper. A young advisor greeted me with professional warmth and led me to her desk. I explained that I needed to restructure my accounts. She listened without interruption, her expression neutral and respectful. There was no curiosity in her eyes, no suggestion of judgment. People came to banks every day carrying private turning points. Mine was simply another. We closed the joint savings account that held $82,000 and transferred the funds into a new account under my name alone. I revoked Daniel's authorization on my credit card and requested additional security measures on my accounts. Each step was procedural, documented, and final. As I signed the last form, a complicated mix of feelings rose within me. Grief, because motherhood had always meant protection. Guilt, because I knew this decision would cause pain, but beneath both was something steadier, a sense of dignity returning, as if I had stepped back into alignment with the truth I had been avoiding. Outside, the late morning sun warmed the pavement. Heat rose in gentle waves from the asphalt, and traffic hummed steadily beyond the parking lot. I paused beside my car and realized my shoulders had relaxed. The tightness that had lived between them for weeks had loosened without my noticing. This was not punishment. It was protection for my future, for the life Robert and I had built, and perhaps for Daniel himself. I chose not to call him. The birthday deadline approached, and the dealership would be expecting payment. If I warned him, I would only be postponing the reality he needed to face. Silence, in this moment, was not avoidance. It was resolve. Back home, I set my purse on the kitchen counter and sat at the table where the morning sunlight now pooled in a bright square across the floor. The house was still. I felt sorrow, yes, and the ache of knowing my son would soon be angry and afraid. But beneath that sorrow was a quiet strength I had not felt in years. Love does not always look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like refusal. And whether I was ready or not, the line had been drawn. 2 days before Vanessa's birthday, the desert air felt unusually still, as if even the wind were waiting for something to break. I moved through my morning routine with deliberate calm, tea steeping beside the sink, curtains drawn open to the clean Arizona light, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. The decision I had made days earlier no longer felt sharp or frightening. It felt settled. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. The moment I answered, I could hear the strain in his breathing. He spoke quickly, words overlapping, as if speed might solve what clarity could not. He said he had tried to transfer the down payment that morning, but the account would not process the request. The bank app showed the account closed. He assumed it was an error, a system issue, something temporary. The dealership, he explained, was expecting confirmation before the end of the day. I waited until he finished before responding. I told him the account was not in error. I had closed it. Silence followed, dense and disbelieving. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted from confusion to alarm. He asked why I would do that without telling him. He said he needed the funds immediately. The vehicle was reserved. Paperwork had been prepared. He had given his word. I kept my voice steady. I reminded him that the money in that account was my retirement savings, not an open line of credit. I reminded him of the outstanding balance on the credit card and the months that had passed without repayment. I spoke quietly, listing facts rather than accusations. His breathing grew heavier. Shock sharpened into frustration. He insisted this was different, that this was not about luxury, but about keeping a promise. Vanessa was expecting the vehicle. Her birthday celebration had been planned around it. He said he could not bear the humiliation of failing to provide something he had already promised. I felt my grip tighten around the phone, though my voice remained calm. I told him he had made a promise using money that did not belong to him. I told him I could not fund a life beyond his means. The words sounded firm even to my own ears, yet they carried no anger, only the weight of truth long delayed. He exhaled sharply and then admitted something he had not mentioned before. Vanessa had told friends and followers that the vehicle was a surprise birthday gift. Photographs and announcements had already been hinted at online. Sponsors watch milestones like this, he said. Expectations had formed beyond their home, beyond their marriage. The pressure he described was larger than I had imagined. It was not only about a car, it was about image, credibility, and the fear of public disappointment. Still, I told him the responsibility remained his. Promises carry consequences. Appearances cannot be financed indefinitely. I would not assume the outcome of decisions I had not made. The line went quiet. For a moment I thought he might say something more, something that might bridge the widening space between us. Instead, he muttered that he did not know how to fix this. The call ended without resolution. I set the phone down and realized my hands were trembling, not with doubt, but with adrenaline. The house seemed unusually silent, as though sound itself had withdrawn to give the moment space. There would be anger. There would be blame. There would be consequences none of us could yet see. But there would be no returning to the past. Truth had surfaced, and with it came the beginning of everything that would follow. If you felt the weight of that confrontation, comment 6 below, and stay with me as we move into Chapter 7. The fallout didn't stay private for long, and what happened next pushed everything to the breaking point. The day after my conversation with Daniel unfolded in a strange, suspended quiet. I moved through the house with the uneasy awareness that something had shifted beyond repair, though nothing in my surroundings had changed. The same sunlight pooled across the tile floor. The same refrigerator hummed in the background, yet the stillness felt heavier, as if the air itself carried the weight of what had begun. I tried to occupy myself with ordinary tasks. I watered the small potted herbs on the patio, wiped down the kitchen counters, and folded laundry that did not need folding. Each movement felt deliberate, an effort to keep my hands busy while my thoughts circled the same unanswered questions. Late that morning, my phone vibrated on the table beside me. A message from Vanessa appeared on the screen. She wrote that I had humiliated Daniel at the dealership. She said he had been forced to walk away after promising payment. She added that the situation could have been avoided if I had simply supported my son. The words were concise, controlled, and edged with accusation. There was no greeting, no softening language, only judgment delivered in neat sentences. I read the message twice before setting the phone down. What I felt was not anger. It was a quiet sadness, the recognition that her concern centered not on Daniel's distress, but on the image that had been fractured. The humiliation she described seemed rooted less in the failed purchase than in the witnesses to it. I did not reply. By afternoon, I began to understand how far the ripples had spread. Daniel had gone to the dealership believing the transfer would process. When it did not, he had stepped aside to make calls, his confidence dissolving under the bright showroom lights. Sales representatives waited politely while he refreshed his banking application again and again. Eventually, there had been nothing left to say. He left without the vehicle. Later, Vanessa posted a brief message online about disappointment and broken promises. She did not include names, but the implication was unmistakable. Comments appeared beneath the post within minutes, offering sympathy, encouragement, and speculation. Reading them felt like watching strangers assemble a narrative from fragments of a life they did not understand. By evening, Daniel called twice. I let the calls go unanswered, needing time to steady myself before hearing his voice again. When the voicemail notification appeared, I listened. He sounded exhausted, as though sleep had abandoned him. He said Vanessa had packed a suitcase and driven to her parents' home in California. She told him she needed space to think. He did not know what to do next. His words carried confusion more than anger, and beneath both was a fragile fear he could not conceal. I sat at the kitchen table, the phone resting in my palm long after the message ended. Every instinct in me urged movement, to call him back, to apologize for his pain, to offer a solution that would restore what had been lost. Yet I knew that rescuing him now would rebuild the same fragile structure that had just collapsed. That night, I imagined the silence inside his house, rooms designed for appearance rather than comfort, carefully chosen furniture absorbing the absence of voices. The stillness would be unfamiliar, perhaps unbearable. I felt grief for him, and for the illusion he had tried so hard to sustain. Consequences, once set in motion, rarely pause for reconsideration. I turned off the lights and sat in the dim glow from the patio door, holding both sorrow and resolve in equal measure. Collapse is painful to witness, especially when it belongs to someone you love. But sometimes collapse is the only ground upon which rebuilding can begin. The days that followed settled into a heavy stillness, as though the world had paused to absorb what had already happened. I kept to my routine, rising early, watering the patio plants, and walking the curved paths of the neighborhood before the heat thickened the air. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, I felt a quiet fatigue that sleep did not ease. Shock has a sharp edge. Reality, once it arrives, is duller and more enduring. 4 days after Vanessa left, Daniel sent a short message asking if he could come by. There was no defensiveness in the wording, no attempt to argue or persuade. The simplicity of the request carried a weight that long explanations never could. I told him he could visit that afternoon. When he arrived, I recognized immediately how much the past week had taken from him. His shirt was wrinkled, as if pulled from a chair rather than a closet. A faint shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. He moved more slowly than usual, as though each step required conscious effort. The confident posture he carried in professional settings had been replaced by something smaller and more uncertain. We sat in the living room, where afternoon light filtered through the blinds in narrow bands across the rug. I brought tea, placing the mugs on the table between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt reflective rather than tense, like the pause that follows a storm when the air is rinsed clean, but the ground remains soaked. Daniel stared into his cup before speaking. He said he had not realized how much pressure he had been carrying until everything collapsed at once. He described the constant awareness of appearances, the subtle comparisons among Vanessa's friends and family, and the quiet humiliation he felt when conversations turned to investments, second homes, and travel plans he could not match. He admitted he began to equate providing luxury with proving his worth. Each purchase felt less like indulgence and more like evidence that he belonged in the life he had married into. When expenses grew beyond his reach, he told himself they were temporary, that future income would balance the present strain. Avoiding difficult conversations seemed easier than admitting limitation. I listened without interrupting. For years, I had offered solutions before fully hearing his fears. This time, understanding felt more necessary than correction. After he finished, I told him that when he first asked for help, I believed I was supporting him through temporary hardship. Over time, I realized my assistance was shielding him from consequences he needed to face. Protection, when extended too far, can become a barrier to growth. He nodded slowly, absorbing the words rather than resisting them. He said he had avoided honest conversations with Vanessa because he feared disappointing her. Each silence, he admitted, had widened the gap between truth and appearance. The room grew quiet again, but the silence felt different now, less burdened, more spacious. Outside, a dove cooed from the roofline, its soft call repeating in steady intervals. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes briefly as if releasing something he had held for years. Honesty had not repaired the damage. It had not restored what was lost, but it had cleared the air between us, making room for something steadier than pretense. Painful as it was, truth had begun its quiet work. If you've stayed this far and feel the truth settling in, comment 8 below as we move toward the final outcome of the story. What came next wasn't loud or dramatic, but it revealed what loss had been preparing us to see all along. By the time autumn softened the desert heat, the sharp edges of that summer had begun to dull. Mornings arrived cooler, carrying a faint dryness that hinted at change rather than endurance. With the passing weeks came distance, and with distance came a clarity neither Daniel nor I could have reached in the first raw days after everything fell apart. It was Daniel who first said the house had to go. He did not describe the decision dramatically. He spoke about numbers, maintenance costs, property taxes, and the strain of carrying a mortgage that no longer made sense. But beneath those practical reasons lay something quieter. The house had become a stage set for a life he could not sustain, each room holding the weight of expectations he had tried to perform rather than inhabit. When the sign went up in the front yard, he told me he felt both relief and embarrassment. Relief at releasing a burden he had carried too long, embarrassment at admitting he could not maintain what others seemed to manage effortlessly. I reminded him that appearances rarely reveal the whole truth. He moved into a modest townhouse on the edge of Tempe. 2 bedrooms, a small patio, and a kitchen designed for use rather than display. When I visited for the first time, I noticed the absence of staged perfection. A dish towel hung over the oven handle, A stack of unopened mail rested near the counter. The space felt lived in, not arranged. He began sending me monthly payments toward the credit card balance, $200 at a time, transferred on the first of each month without reminder. The amount was modest, but the consistency carried a weight of intention far greater than the sum itself. Responsibility, I realized, often reveals itself through repetition rather than grand gestures. Daniel also left the high-pressure sales environment that had shaped so much of his recent life. He began working independently, consulting for smaller real estate teams that needed marketing strategy and client outreach. The income was less predictable, but steadier in its demands. He spoke of his work without the tight urgency I once heard in his voice. One evening, he mentioned that Vanessa had reached out. Several brand partnerships had dissolved after her online credibility came into question. She wrote that she missed him and regretted how things had unfolded. He told me he read the message more than once before setting the phone down. He did not answer. He said he needed to understand who he was without the pressure to perform before he could consider any return to the past. His voice carried sadness, but not longing. A few weeks later, he told me he had met someone named Claire, a pediatric nurse who worked long shifts at a children's hospital. She drove an aging sedan, packed her lunches, and laughed easily, even at jokes Daniel admitted were not especially funny. They had met through mutual friends at a casual backyard gathering where no one photographed the evening. When he spoke about her, his shoulders relaxed in a way I had not seen for years. He laughed more now. He listened without glancing at his phone. He spoke about plans in terms of possibility rather than impression. Watching him, I understood that hardship had stripped away more than comfort. It had removed the illusion that worth could be measured in square footage, vehicles, or curated images. What remained was quieter, less visible, and infinitely more durable. And for the first time in a long while, I felt grateful for what had been lost, because it revealed what could never be taken away. Winter in Scottsdale is subtle. The air cools just enough to invite long walks in the morning, and the light softens into something gentler, less demanding. By December, the sharp heat that defines summer feels like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet clarity that makes even ordinary days feel deliberate and calm. Several months have passed since the morning I sat across from a bank advisor and chose a different path for my life and my son's. Time has not erased what happened, but it has softened the edges, transforming sharp pain into something more reflective, more instructive. When Daniel visits now, he arrives without hurry. He lingers at the kitchen counter while I pour tea, sometimes describing a new client, sometimes simply watching the late afternoon light shift across the patio tiles. His voice carries an ease that was absent for years. There is less urgency in his sentences, fewer references to what others expect, and more attention to what feels sustainable and true. I notice the change in small ways. He listens fully when I speak instead of glancing at his phone. He laughs more readily. He no longer frames success in terms of possessions or appearances. The absence of that tension has altered his posture, his breathing, even the cadence of his speech. I have spent many quiet mornings reflecting on the decision that once felt so severe. In the moment, setting boundaries felt like stepping away from my role as protector. It carried guilt, fear, and the certainty that Daniel would feel betrayed. Yet, I see now that continuing to rescue him would have allowed the deeper harm to continue. The slow erosion of responsibility, honesty, and self-worth. Motherhood does not end when a child becomes an adult. It changes shape. When Daniel was young, love meant providing safety and stability. As he grew, love meant guidance and trust. Now, love requires something more difficult: restraint. Protecting him from every consequence would not strengthen him. It would prevent him from becoming the man he is capable of being. I have come to understand the difference between helping and enabling. For years, I believed financial support was an expression of care. Gradually, it became a shield between Daniel and the reality he needed to face. Shields may protect in battle, but when carried too long, they become barriers to growth. Happiness cannot be purchased, no matter how convincing the advertisement or how polished the image. Approval built on spending is fragile, dependent on an audience that is always ready to shift its attention elsewhere. Authentic partnership, whether in marriage or friendship, rests on honesty, shared values, and the willingness to live within truth rather than performance. I know many parents struggle to say no. Conflict feels like failure. We fear damaging relationships we have spent a lifetime nurturing. Yet boundaries, though painful at first, create the conditions for strength. Anger may come, misunderstanding may follow. But clarity, once established, allows both parent and child to stand on solid ground. Today, I feel lighter than I have in years. My finances are secure, but more importantly, my sense of dignity is intact. I am no longer measuring love by sacrifice alone. I am measuring it by honesty, respect, and the courage to act in alignment with my values. Daniel is building a life grounded in truth rather than appearance. I trust his resilience now in a way I could not when I was shielding him from consequence. That trust brings a quiet peace I once mistook for control. Boundaries did not break our family. They revealed its strength. And in that strength, I have found something more enduring than comfort. I have found peace. Sometimes the hardest truths arrive disguised as loss. What feels like an ending can become the moment clarity finally takes root, revealing the difference between comfort and peace. We spend years believing love means rescuing, smoothing the path, and absorbing consequences for those we care about. Yet real love carries a quieter strength. It respects boundaries. It allows accountability. It trusts that growth often begins where illusion collapses. When we release the need to preserve appearances, we make space for honesty, dignity, and a life built on what is sustainable rather than impressive. Peace does not come from control. It comes from alignment with our values and the courage to protect them. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and consider subscribing for more stories of resilience and truth. Thank you for being here. Your support helps these stories reach others who need them most.